The Democratic Republic of the Congo is at war. Right now, a rebel insurgency has taken hold in the country's east, capturing villages, pushing back Congolese soldiers, and proving all but impossible to shake out from their centers of power. The Congo is fighting hard to contain them, but it's struggling to do so as the rebels perpetrate unbelievable atrocities against civilians and soldiers alike. Even with the help of foreign guidance, the Congo is unable to get the upper hand, and as the rebels take more and more territory, the nation's incredibly lucrative natural resources fall under insurgent control. But if that sounds like we're describing the Congo war that you might already know, fought between the government in Kinshasa and the Rwanda-backed rebel group M23, well, think again, because the other war, hidden in the Congolese east, promises to be even worse. The rebels are known as the ADF, a ruthless, extremist movement that swears loyalty to the Islamic State and trains thousands of disillusioned young men to plunder and pillage as they see fit. Neighboring Uganda already has boots on the ground, but it's not enough, and as the ADF swells in power, it risks setting off a final cascade that could destroy the Congo as we know it. Just before we continue with today's episode, let me be honest, bad underwear kind of just ruins your day in a quiet and persistent way, doesn't it? You're like, why? I can't wait to go home and put some different trousers on. I'll just change my pants, please. Well, this is where today's fantastic sponsor, Sheath, comes into the picture. They make the most incredible boxer briefs that you will ever wear. They are the only underwear that I wear anymore because all of my old underwear has been thrown out and gradually replaced with Sheath. Now, they have this very specific system, which honestly I was a bit skeptical of at first. It's got different parts for your different parts, if you get what I mean. Like for dudes. You know, it keeps everything separated. It keeps everything comfortable and not sweaty and just not unpleasant. And I mean, that's true in the summer. It's true all year round, let's be honest, gents. And this is just the way to go. The fabric is breathable, it is stretchy, it is moisture wicking. It basically just made to survive everything from like a heat wave to just, being in the office where it's a bit too warm, especially down there. Plus, they've started using bamboo and mesh in newer styles, which somehow makes them even better. I've got a bunch of those as well. They're easy to wash, easy to like, and well, yeah, I just swapped all my other underwear, so you should try them as well because they're fantastic. Go to sheath.com/warfronts and use the code warfronts to get 20% off your order. That's sheath.com/warfronts, code warfronts. And now back to today's episode. Let's have a pop quiz because everybody loves those. What is the official name for the North Korean government? Ooh, great question, Evan, who wrote this script. The country's the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It's going to be something like the Godly Kims or something, right? It's not the Kim family dynasty regime or the royal dictatorship of Pyongyang. It's the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Oh, okay, it is that. Excellent. Of course, if you know anything about the North Korean state in real life, you'll know that it is neither democratic nor a republic, nor even slightly concerned with its own people. But then you'd also know the cardinal rule of naming things. In world politics, names, whether for movements or for nations, don't determine destiny. So perhaps it should be unsurprising that the Islamic State affiliate that's currently running roughshod across the eastern Congo plays by North Korea's rules of nomenclature. The ADF, officially speaking, are the Allied Democratic Forces. Unlike the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, the ADF has spent exactly none of its time as an allied democratic force. The ADF got its start in the 1990s as the brainchild of a Ugandan convert to Islam named Jamil Makulu. Based in Uganda at the time that he started organizing an armed insurgent group, Makulu had spent time in Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, learning Salafi jihadist ideology, picking up some military training, and hanging out with Osama bin Laden. For real. When Makulu came home to Uganda, he tried to take an active role in some important elections, but ended up leading about 1,000 people in riots that left 4 police officers dead. These were made up of Makulu and about 430 of the people who'd followed him, members of an Islamic sect called Tablighi. Makulu spent a couple of years in prison, during which time he and his associates decided to form a resistance, and eventually a local Islamic Caliphate. They organized into an insurgency, endured a few brutal raids from the Ugandan government, and fled across the porous border into the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC, and again, for the record, that is a place which is neither democratic or a functioning republic. In 1995, Makulu joined his resistance together with a number of other Ugandan rebel factions hiding out in the Congo, and thus the Allied Democratic Forces was born. Now, As for what the ADF actually believed, well, if you want specifics, you have to ask them. In broad strokes, they see themselves as members of a religious uprising, trying to fight back against discrimination against their specific brand of Islam within Uganda and establish a better nation to host their movement. A part of the ADF movement, although not all of it, wants to build a caliphate, and in this particular case, ideology really doesn't go much deeper than that. At least not before the discussion descends into infighting that we, as outsiders, don't really need to focus on. The ADF is an organized religious insurgency. It has a massive bone to pick with Uganda, and for decades it's maintained a presence in Uganda's remote western mountains while using the near anarchy of the eastern DRC as a base of operations. They've intermittently launched large attacks in both nations, they've spread small cells all across the DRC and Uganda, and starting in 2017, they fell in with the global Islamic State movement. Within a couple of years, the ADF shed a small splinter group of loyalists to the original cause and basically became a full appendage of the Islamic State. They survived a subsequent offensive from the DRC, they've spread out in opposite directions, and the bulk of the ADF settled in the Congolese region, where they've since rebuilt their forces, the Ituri province. Alright, so fast forward to today, and the Congo is a very different place than what it was when the first bands of ADF fighters came streaming across the border from Uganda. Led by an iron-fisted autocrat named Felix Tshisekedi, the Congo is in the middle of a war that's only escalated since 2024. In that war, a larger and more powerful rebel faction, M23, has managed to beat back the Congolese government and establish control across a large part of the country. M23 is supported financially, logistically, and militarily by the neighboring nation of Rwanda, and with the help of several thousand uniformed Rwandan soldiers fighting on the Congo soil, M23 has taken over 2 provisional capital cities in the past year. These are the cities of Goma and Bukavu, located on the northern and southern ends, respectively, of a large body of water called Lake Kivu. Just as important, M23 has captured the entire Congolese border with Rwanda, enabling Rwanda to smuggle large amounts of a highly lucrative metal, coltan, out. Together, Rwanda and M23 have engaged in a cycle of territorial capture and self-enrichment, and together they've proved that the DRC government can't really do very much to stop them. The Congolese military is under-equipped, underfunded, and undermotivated. It battles well over 100 insurgencies in the Congo's east, besides M23 and the ATF, and the nation's political leadership is incredibly corrupt, interested mostly just in self-dealing and state graft. Technically, the Congo and Rwanda are bound by a peace agreement signed in the summer of 2025, while the Congo and M23 are engaged in their own separate peace process. In reality, though, the situation has barely improved, with intense violence ongoing in and around areas that M23 controls, with Rwanda seeming to benefit tremendously from the control that M23 provides. Millions are displaced. Tens of millions across the DRC grapple with chronic food insecurity, and the death toll from the recent fighting is practically impossible to pin down. It's here, in the chaos and the anarchy of the Eastern Congo, that a group like the Allied Democratic Forces can thrive. But instead of just minding their own affairs and living as they please in Ituri province, the ADF has recently kicked off a wave of incredibly violent attacks in Ituri and the surrounding region. Neither civilians, nor local militias, nor even government troops are immune from attack, and by all outward indicators, the ADF isn't just carrying out massacres for massacre's sake. Someone within the shadowy inner circle of the ADF's leadership has decided that now is the time to build a caliphate. And just before we get into that, let me tell you about our fantastic newsletter. It goes out twice per week, once long form, once a bit of a Friday blitz, which is actually what we called it. The newsletter is completely free. It keeps you right up to date with everything that we don't quite get to here or that we need to get to extra quickly. You can sign up through the link below. Like I said, did I say it's free? Why would you not? Why would you not? Let's get back to it. If anything is known for sure about the ADF, it's the group's undeniable taste for blood. Ever since it was founded, across Uganda and the DRC, the ADF has carried out mass attacks against the civilian population, sometimes using firearms, sometimes by bombings, sometimes by taking dozens of people captive at once, but usually by machete. Some of the attacks that the ADF has carried out over the broad span of the insurgency are among the most horrific acts of organized terror that the modern world has seen. In 1998, they massacred 80 students at a technical school. In 1999, they broke well over 300 terrorists out of prison. In December 2013, they launched attacks on a Congolese city that saw 21 people beheaded and dozens more massacred. In 2014, they dressed up as Congolese soldiers and massacred up to 80 civilians just days before hacking 36 to death with machetes in the same area. In 2017, they killed 15 UN peacekeepers and 5 Congolese soldiers, while in 2020, 40 civilians would be hacked to death in the span of a single village assault. In 2023, according to the conflict tracking group ACLED, the ADF was responsible for over 1,000 civilian deaths. But once the M23 rebellion around Lake Kivu started to heat up in early 2025, the ADF capitalized on the chaos with a new level of efficiency. In January, days after locals uncovered the bodies of numerous combat veterans who the ADF appeared to have hunted down and killed, the insurgents began a new asymmetric campaign in the countryside. By January the 15th, the massacres had started again, with 32 civilians left dead on that day, killed by machete in the village of Mahangi. Another coordinated attack at the end of the month killed another 15 people, while dozens more were killed or wounded in smaller attacks across the region. In early February, the ADF killed over 100 people across several massacres in Ituri, and then abducted and beheaded at least 70 Christian civilians in North Kivu province. Uganda surged troops into the province and threatened to take a city by force if necessary, but the ADF didn't slow down. Over the following months, as M23 swelled in strength and took over Goma and then Bukavu, the ADF was busy raiding villages, burning homes and attacking civilians with few, if any, consequences. Those massacres still persist to this day. At least 43 civilians killed at night vigil in mid-July, at least 52 killed in a North Kivu attack in mid-August, and countless smaller, asymmetric attacks dot in the landscape. Making matters worse, the ADF was supposed to be on the back foot before the new wave of violence began. Since 2021, the Congo has partnered with Ugandan forces in Operation Shuija, a joint military counter-offensive that's meant to stamp out the ADF and other smaller insurgencies in the Ituri and Kivu regions. Although the fighting hasn't been easy, the joint forces claim to have killed hundreds of ADF fighters over the course of the operation, with Uganda claiming that in late 2023, the number of ADF and Islamic State fighters killed had crested past 500. The joint force had taken credit for pushing the ADF out of long-protected strongholds, securing cities that had been the target of ADF violence for years, and killing highly ranked members of the group that had pillaged their way across the border region with impunity. But in a way, it's the achievements of Operation Shuja that have destabilized the region even further. Instead of fighting hard to keep their bases and their prior center of power, the ADF committed to fully asymmetric warfare, melting away into the dense jungle, splintering off into roving bands, and appearing to switch over to digital communications to coordinate further attacks. Those smaller bands of fighters now spread over a much wider geographical area, moving unpredictably toward new communities that hadn't been at anywhere near as much risk before the offensive. Because they have to move around so often and can't settle long enough to either establish supply lines or produce their own food, these bands are even more incentivized to prey on local communities for subsistence, and in turn, violent confrontation becomes ever more likely. When Uganda surged thousands of troops into the Congo to deal with the ADF's 2025 escalation, it succeeded in displacing these bands yet again. But for the insurgents, that doesn't seem to matter much anymore. With the chaos coming from North and South Kivu, the ADF has proved adept in taking advantage of M23-related violence to perpetrate attacks of its own. On numerous occasions, the ADF has seemed to track and then shadow M23 violence with its own, attacking civilians in areas that M23 had only just hit, or taking advantage of M23 victories and the corresponding troop movements to the DRC to attack newly exposed weak points in the areas they control. All the while, they've shifted away from the territory of the nation that actually can focus on them, Uganda, while moving their operational center toward the war zone in North Kivu. According to Ugandan military intelligence, the ADF has even agreed to new alliances with other insurgent groups, including a militant network called CODECO, itself implicated in massacres in 2025. To ally itself with any other movement in the 2020s is a rare step for the ADF to take, but it reflects the opportunity that the ADF perceives in a moment when territory in the eastern Congo is just ripe for the taking. Now, at the time of writing, a fragile early ceasefire in the eastern Congo appears as if it's about to come apart in a collapse that would send the DRC and M23 back toward each other's throats. Meanwhile, ADF violence only continues, with the group seeming even more emboldened now that it can operate in the grey space of a frozen conflict zone. Congolese forces can't focus on it, Ugandan forces can't catch it, and M23, at least outwardly, doesn't seem to mind its presence. The two insurgencies operate in close proximity, but avoid crossing paths whenever possible. Assuming that the war in the Congo either restarts relatively soon or remains in a mostly frozen stalemate between M23 and Rwanda, the ADF is primed to take advantage. Their actual fighting strength, that's difficult to pin down. A few years ago, they were thought to have only a few hundred fighters, and that still could be the case today. The ADF, partly because of their own actions, are based in one of the most dangerous regions on Earth, where it's exceptionally difficult for outside reporters or researchers to gain safe access, and where groups like the ADF are entirely comfortable melting away into forests without ever gathering in the open. But although that means they could be a tiny force, by any global standard, it also means that their numbers could be swelling over time, recruiting and training new fighters under some of the thickest fog of war anywhere in the world. Local recruits do seem to be joining the ADF at alarming rates, and they're not the only ones. The anarchy of the Eastern Congo and the lack of scrutiny from the outside world has made it a favored link in the global Islamic State network, which sends experienced foreign fighters in large numbers to swell the ADF's ranks. Not only that, but the ADF has become a key conduit for Islamic State financial operations. As the leadership of the global Islamic State comes under threat in the northern Somali region of Puntland, where they've been based for the last couple of years, it's likely that a growing number of those international leaders will make their pilgrimage and find refuge in Ituri. At the same time, the ADF is deeply integrated into local financial networks and black markets, self-funding their operations with relatively impressive results. Long before this most recent wave of violence, the ADF had made itself a key part of the local economy, smuggling gold, lucrative timber, and critical minerals from the DRC into Uganda, where the resources they've captured can be sold at a premium to black market middlemen. Now the middlemen have changed. With the ADF abandoning the Ugandan border, it'll more frequently deal with M23, Rwanda, and other militias that will buy resources and then try to resell at a profit. But the same basic formula remains. The ADF will capture, extract, loot, or otherwise obtain whatever lucrative assets they can, make some money, and then use that money to finance recruitment, logistics, and further attacks. As for whether the ADF can really seize on this moment and establish the Caliphate that the Islamic State organization so covets, that path is complicated. Right now, the ADF isn't in a position to claim a large pocket of territory and thus to open itself up for a sustained military offensive by Uganda. Right now, the ADF travels in units known as camps with armed insurgents, their families, and captured civilians, moving about the landscape, pitching tents wherever they land, and taking their weapons and supplies with them. The camps are substantial. All told, between fighters, civilians, and hostages, ACLED estimated in early 2025 that the largest camp is made up of 1,000 or more people. But if they grow any larger, they stop being mobile. And if they stop being mobile, they're vulnerable to Ugandan reprisals at scale. Perhaps for that reason, the ADF hasn't really tried to take control of local governments over the last couple of years. Instead, they attack, loot everything they can find, kidnap locals for ransom, kill whoever they like, and move on to repeat the process someplace else. But the ADF is an insurgency that's become accustomed to playing the long game, and barring a surprise long-term peace agreement between the Congo and M23, the ADF has a major opportunity to play the Congo to its own benefit. Uganda, despite the rhetoric of its military leaders, can't simply chase down the ADF in the Congo as they see fit. Nor can they follow the ADF too close to M23 territory, lest they get wrapped up in a proxy war with Rwanda. The Congo can't muster the forces it would need to hunt down the ADF. At best, they can deter the ADF from attacking certain areas and try to counterattack when the ADF launches an assault. Put plainly, the ADF is safe as long as it stays mobile and keeps doing what it's doing. But at the context of the M23 conflict, and an ADF attempt to hold steady turns into an opportunity for conquest. It was only a couple of months ago that the Congo was trying desperately to shore up its forces, worried that M23 was about to make a run on the capital city, barreling down a major highway like Syria's rebels did in late 2024 toward Damascus, or like Wagner Group mercenaries did in 2023 toward Moscow. It could still take as little as a couple of months, as few as 1 or 2 destabilizing incidents at the right time and place to send the DRC back to that precipice again. In that situation, it wouldn't take much from the ADF to send Congolese forces into a tailspin, an asymmetric raiding campaign against their backlines, the seizure of a nearby town or city as a distraction, or a wave of suicide bombings against military targets, just to name a few options. Cause chaos, force Congolese troops into disarray, and the ADF could clear the way for M23 and its Rwandan allies to deliver maximum damage. The ADF can't bring down the Congolese government in Kinshasa, at least not by itself. But what the insurgent group can do is create conditions in which the incredibly fragile Congolese state would be at risk of complete collapse. Strike a backroom deal with M23, gain the consent of Rwanda, or create a situation where Uganda has to pull back, and the ADF could find itself in a vastly improved position. Quickly. Instead of being beaten with the hammer of Ugandan forces backed up against the unsteady but decent enough anvil that is the Congolese military, the ADF could find itself in de facto control of a decent chunk of lands with few, if any, adversary forces to be found. At the same time, it would find lucrative mines and lumber forests to exploit, with local communities trapped and living at the ADF's mercy. Best of all, from the ADF's perspective, it would stand a good chance at being listened to when it approaches its higher-ups in the global Islamic State movement and says, "We've got the chance to build a caliphate, surge money, fighters and resources now." With a lot of luck, there's still hope that the deteriorating situation in the Congo can be stabilized and that the DRC, Uganda, Rwanda, and their international partners can start building toward a better situation. In that world, perhaps the ADF finds itself on the receiving end of a coordinated counter-insurgent campaign with the power to put a permanent end to the group's reign of terror. But if there's any constant in the eastern Congo, it's the instability, the chaos, and the anarchy that's allowed the ADF insurgency to thrive. If the Congo can't stop the ADF from lying in wait, then it shouldn't be surprised if, when all begins to collapse, it's the Allied Democratic Forces that deal Kinshasa its killing blow. Thank you for watching.